I am proud to introduce one of Longmont's best-known citizens. Vance Brand was born in Longmont, right on Lincoln Street. He attended Central Elementary School and Longmont High School. After graduating from the University of Colorado, he flew fighter jets for the U.S. Marine Corps and then became a test pilot. In 1966, he was accepted into NASA's 5th astronaut class. His long and varied space exploration career includes participating in the first international space mission as command module pilot on the Apollo-Soyuz test project. He commanded 3 space shuttle missions in 1982, 1984, and 1990. Vance Brand's new autobiography, Flying Higher and Faster, will be available for signing after tonight's event. He is here tonight with his wife, Beverly, sons Dane and Patrick, and daughter-in-law, Kathy. It is truly an honor to have an American hero return to his hometown. Please join me in welcoming Vance Brand.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful being here back in Longmont. Before I start, I'd like to have my family wave, family members that are here that Eric just mentioned. Well, when I was growing up, Longmont was really a different place. It was about 8,000 population, but a wonderful place to grow up. I had grandparents out in hygiene, and when I was a little kid, a grandfather on the Longmont City Council. My dad was a local vet. My parents' families came over in the early 1900s from various places, father's side from New York and the mother's side from Ohio. And actually, I think when my mother's family first came out, they were in Fort Lupton. It was only about 37 years after the end of the Western frontier. Some people say that frontier may still be going, but it was after 1990 when the fighting died down. So we were, I guess what you'd call native Coloradoans, but now I've lived in California for quite a while. So I hope none of that's rubbed off. I would like to show you a film, but before I do, I'll narrate the film. Before I do, I'd just like to say that I was very lucky in life because had I been born 20 years earlier, my profession didn't exist, that of astronaut. And of course, now there are astronauts, shake a bush and an astronaut falls out. But I was going through my old yearbook, graduated from high school here down on Main Street, the old high school, in 1949. And it was, I was going through a page of the book that sort of said, what are these people going to do in life? And I read that and I came across my name. It turned out that it said that Bob Akers, who was a classmate, would open a machine shop, and he would develop a space engine that didn't require any fuel, and it could go to the planets, which is a great idea. And I was his assistant and another classmate. So at least I got into the space business, but didn't develop any great engine or anything like that. But believe it or not, they're talking about space engines now that are similar to what that would have been, that can somehow be fueled by the vacuum of space. It's not a sure thing yet, but maybe in 100 or 200 years we'll have marvelous things like that in space. Well, when I left Longmont, went to CU, and from there into the Marine Corps, and I really didn't think about flying in my life until I was at Cherry Point, North Carolina, on an early Marine Corps assignment, and jet airplanes, which were fairly new back in the early 50s, were taking off, fighter airplanes, and I thought, man, I've just got to do that. I was very lucky, although I was completely confused about what I wanted to do in life until the age of 22, when I got to that base and I saw those airplanes taking off. I just wanted to do that. And from there on, it was going to machines that were flying higher and faster, and ultimately space machines, which fly pretty high and go pretty fast. Well, I'm sorry that I won't be around for the next 100 years, because I think marvelous things may happen in the exploration of space. It all depends upon the will of the people of this country and of the world. And I think there's a good chance that in the lifetime of some of the children, that are alive now, that they will witness somebody walking on Mars. We're doing marvelous things in space with drones, but the big thing in the future, I think, will be taking people into deep space. Well, as Eric mentioned, my career in NASA amounted to being first in the Apollo program and helping develop that, being on an Apollo backup crew, and but the guy I was backing up didn't break a leg or get the measles, so I didn't get to go to the moon. But I did get, after Apollo-Soyuz, the link up with the Russians, or the Soviets as we called them back then, in 1975. I flew the shuttle, and we had 3 great flights, so you'll see some of that in the footage that's coming up now. So if you'd roll the film, I'll talk about it. This is the Apollo rocket on the pad, and we went out there in the early hours, and we were following the launch of this Russian Soyuz. And so this is Russian footage of the Soyuz lifting off in Kazakhstan in Central Asia. They got on orbit, and then we launched 7.5 hours later and took 2 days catching up with them rendezvousing with them. Here you see some of the really cool liftoff shots, the ice and everything breaking off of the rock as it goes into space. We had a good crowd there. My parents were in that group, and quite a few people from Longmont, as a matter of fact. After 2.5 minutes, the first stage dropped off, and that's what you see here. And it only took about 9 minutes to get into orbit. I forget, it was 8 to 10 minutes. And then we, as I said, spent 2 days catching up and finally rendezvoused and docked with the Russian spacecraft, which is what you see there. This is ours. And that's theirs. It looked sort of like a green bug when I first saw it. It had green colored fabric on the outside and wings. And that's a docking target that was used by Tom Stafford to perform the docking. Very shortly thereafter, guys from our side went through interconnecting module, the docking module, and went into the Soyuz, where they signed documents and ate a meal. And I was back minding the store because our spacecraft was really holding attitude for everything that was linked together. So I missed this ceremony and got into the Soyuz for 4.5 hours later. But this was during the Cold War that many of you may remember, and it was, some people say it was just one of the steps toward trying to end the Cold War and to show some cooperation instead of animosity between the two countries. Our guys are going into their spacecraft here. And they had pictures on the wall. Alexei Leonov, one of the crewmen on their side, is a good artist, so he's put sketches on the wall. And there was a lot of ceremony. We ate meals in their spacecraft. They came over into ours and had meals. It was and here I'm exercising. It's a kind of a rubber bungee exerciser. And finally it was time to leave. We undocked from them and flew around them doing an experiment. We had about 5 joint experiments with them and another 25 of our own. So there was a lot of science being done on that mission in a lot of different areas. Here we are undocking, and very shortly you'll see us redock. This was a command and service module. Well, at the end of the mission, they landed in Kazakhstan, and a few days later we landed out by Hawaii in the ocean. And so we were under 3 parachutes. There's our splashdown. Our spacecraft turned over as soon as it hit the water, so we had to right it again by inflating those big balloons on the top of the spacecraft, and we went aboard a carrier. The next mission is STS-5. That was in 1982, and it was my first flight in the shuttle. I got to command 3 shuttle flights, so that was the first one. our job, well, it was billed as the first operational flight of the shuttle. And we had a crew of 4 and 2 telecommunication satellites that would be sent to high Earth orbit about 20-some thousand miles above the Earth. So we were to take them into Earth orbit, and then they would have a rocket booster that was ignited, and they would go into orbit. Well, here we are during launch. I talked all through launch, but it was somewhat similar to an Apollo launch, and it involved hardware that's made over here in Littleton at McDonnell Douglas, which is Steve Martin. On the way up into orbit with the shuttle, those solid rockets burn out. There are 2 of them, and they peel off. And once on orbit, then this is the deployment of one of our satellites. Everything worked very well, and we were just elated by the mission. And that's the satellite going out into the blackness of space. At the end, we considered ourselves to be in a delivery service, Ace Moving Company. I think Joe Allen came up with that one. And here's what the cockpit and the shuttle looked like. I was on the left. Bob Overmeyer was co-pilot on the right. And got to land at Edwards Air Force Base on their runway. And it was a great mission. When you go through a mission, there are a lot of steps, and you kind of breathe a sigh of relief every time you get by one of the milestones successfully. Here we are coming down, meeting the boss and some of the folks that helped make the mission a success. Interestingly, you're about 2 inches taller after you come down from space, but that only lasts about a day. Okay, the next is going to be STS-41B, which was a flight in Challenger. Challenger and Columbia were both lost, but this was my Challenger flight. And here's liftoff. Once again, beautiful photography of a momentous event. There's a lot of shake, rattle, and roll. And so it's the first time you experience it, it's especially meaningful. Once on orbit, here I am going up a ladder, except you don't need a ladder up there. And we had a lot of spacewalks, EVAs, what we call them. And this is Bruce Mccandless, who currently lives up in the mountains west of Denver. But back then, he helped the contractor develop the MMU, which was a backpack for flying out into space. He went out, he and Bob Stewart, the first Army officer to fly in space, went out 100 yards away from the spacecraft with no ropes attached. They just had propulsion in their backpacks. And here's the landing. It was the first landing at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And it's much the same as landing at Edwards. The only thing is the terrain's a little different. And you have to make sure all the alligators and wild pigs are scared off the runway. It had been foggy the night before, and so you see the residual stream coming off of the wingtips, and you see a little bit of haziness. But when we landed, it was good. The runway there is 3 miles long, so you don't have to sweat putting on the brakes too early. And my last mission was in 1990, just before the Gulf War, and that was in Colombia again. And this was a night flight. So during launch, we got to look around and see that part of Florida that was being lit up by the rocket blast. We launched fairly late at night and later landed at night too, at Edwards. On orbit, always a lot to see, but here we're over ocean. So, and if there are clouds, of course, it's hard to see anything, but most of the time we were over clear areas, it seemed. Can't capture it, but sunrises and sunsets on orbit are beautiful, multicolored. Here we're opening the payload bay doors so that we can work the telescopes. We had 4 professional PhD astronomers in the crew, a crew of 7. And so they cranked up the telescope, infrared and X-ray telescopes, which of course look at a little different sort of light than what we see outside in the daytime. We would generally maneuver on the lit up side of the Earth so that we were pointing at a star or galaxy or dust cloud, whatever we wanted to look at. And then they would do their work when we went into the on the dark side of the Earth. Of course, it only took 90 minutes to go around the Earth. And so they had probably 40 minutes or so at least to do their science. Now, before we could re-enter and come home, we had to check out the elevons and other systems to make sure that this machine would work right as an airplane as well as a spacecraft. And here we are doing that. And my hair's a little out of control there. In weightlessness, you need to put something on it. And we landed at Edwards at night, about 10 o'clock at night. And here we are rolling out. This picture was taken with infrared film, so you can see the light parts of the vehicle are still hot. We came down, met the boss as usual, and that was about it. We had briefings after that, and that was my last flight into space. Well, the space program, when when I was a kid, there wasn't a space program. Nobody had gone into space. It was before Sputnik, and so, as I said, I was really lucky to onto the space program, and I was in the right age bracket. My father's age would not have qualified him, and even now, it's a little bit hard to get into space, but it's going to improve, I think, especially with the commercialization of space starting up now. The government will still do things in Earth orbit, but eventually I think we'll have quite a few people up there. And I'm sorry that I can't live for another 100 years, because I think somebody from Earth will be walking on Mars, maybe in, I don't know how many years, but it all depends on the people. I think we can develop the wherewithal to do it, and it's a matter of the people wanting to do it like they did with Apollo. I remember thinking in Apollo that it's so difficult, I don't know how this program of getting to the moon can succeed. But it worked. They succeeded. And there was a lot of risk involved. It was not risk-free. As you know, they had Apollo 13, an accident up there, but recovered the crew okay. I think in the future, there will always be risks in space, just like there are in flying airplanes or even driving cars. But maybe that will all get a little better with time. I'm sure it will. So with that, I'd just like to say that I felt very fortunate to have been raised in Longmont. It was a great town when I was growing up, and I'm happy to see that it's evolving into, well, it's 10 times bigger now, or maybe 12 times bigger, but it's kept pace with the times. It's transitioned from a small farming town into, well, a very industrial, modern sort of scene these days. And I'm not up on all the space industry you have around here, but I know that Longmont, Broomfield, and Boulder have an awful lot. And we read about them in the news every now and then. So with that, I'd like to, before I stop, just say that I'm really glad my family, some of my family members were able to come here for this. 2 sons, daughter-in-law, wife, and so this has been a happy thing for me. With that, let's go into questions. Yeah.
So before we start with questions, we have one announcement, and then the way the questions are going to work is if someone will say the question and then I will repeat it into the microphone. But I think first we have an announcement.
We do. So there's a green car. They didn't tell me what kind. It's green, though. In the parking lot, the license plate is QJL179. Your lights are blinking and your alarm is going off. If that's your car, you might want to go check it out. So Eric's going to take the front of the room. I'm going to help out back here in the back. So why don't we go ahead and get started with questions?
All right. So Ellen, you had a question?
I always have a question. Do you think there is life of some sort on other planets?
So the question is, do you think there is life on other planets?
Okay. I'm not a specialist in this area, so this is just my opinion. First of all, There are so many galaxies out there and so many stars in each galaxy that I think it would be almost presumptive of us to assume that there isn't life out there somewhere. But on other planets, I believe you mentioned, well, I think there's a pretty good chance that there will be life underground in Mars. The surface of Mars is flooded with intense sunlight with no thick atmosphere to filter it. So we may not ever see anything on the surface, but go down 6 feet or 10 feet, I wouldn't be at all surprised, but we'll find life there. Also, there are 2 moons, Enceladus and Europa, moons of Jupiter and Saturn that have, they're icy moons, but underneath the ice are big oceans. And there are a lot of people thinking that there will be life underneath that ice in the oceans. So we'll all, well, somebody will know someday, because science keeps marching on. And I think we have missions that are going up to explore those moons. And we're doing a lot on Mars these days. You know, we've had several successful Mars robots, and so we're learning a lot about Mars. So answers my opinion, yes.
All right.
How about one from the back half? Way up here in the very back. What's your question?
What did you have to eat when you visited the Russian capsule? And what did you serve the Russians?
The question was, what did you have to eat when you visited the Russian capsule? And what did they eat when they visited you?
Well, I'll start with the last part. We had all a big variety of types of food on our spacecraft. We had a lot of freeze-dried stuff. All you had to do is add hot or cold water to it, and you could come up with everything but no leafy salads or anything like that. We also had military rations, and for some of the later shuttle missions, we had fresh fruit. We had apples and oranges and things like that. On my last mission, that was very tasty, and it went very well for about 3 or 4 days. And then the stuff started to rot. And it smelled so bad that we had to put it in a sealed bag and take it back to Earth. But now the other first part of the question, when we went into their spacecraft, they had a lot of foods that they were still eating out of tubes like toothpaste tubes. They had fish and borscht, which is a beet soup, and things that most of us aren't too familiar with, but which in our training before the mission, we'd learned a little bit about, so their food was good too.
Yes, the young woman. So the question is about your helicopter flying.
Oh, well, I have 400 hours in one of the early helicopters. At the time, everybody in the Apollo program, which I was a part of, was getting to learn to fly helicopters because we thought that the skills would transfer over to landing the lunar vehicle. And so, yeah, I have those 400 hours, I really enjoyed flying the helicopter. It's different, but it was fun.
Okay, another one from the back. How about this gentleman right here?
So I'm curious, which ride did you like better, the Apollo or the shuttle, as far as smoothness? And which one was your favorite?
So the question was, which ride was best, the Apollo or the shuttle? And which was your favorite, correct? Which
Okay,
was smoothest?
I'm going to cheat on this answer. If I was going to the moon or into deep space, the shuttle wouldn't work, and the Apollo was a great vehicle. It had a computer back in those early days, and you could do things with it, some things that you couldn't do with the shuttle. If I were to be in Earth orbit, I liked the shuttle because you had wall-to-wall windows. You could see out a lot. You could, if you were coming up on something like Gibraltar or Dakar or Cairo, somebody in the spacecraft would say, "Hey, I see Cairo," and then everybody would break away for a couple of minutes there and just look going over it. And so the other thing about the shuttle was like flying an airplane, especially when you land. So I like that better than plopping down in the ocean under parachutes.
Right, yes. Yes, right here. If you could go back to space, would you do it again?
Would I do it again? Well, I couldn't pass the physical now, but if I certainly would if I could pass the physical. And I thought each space flight was a challenge, and I enjoyed the flight and the challenge. So I would, yeah. But not to Mars. I wouldn't make it that. I would have gone to Mars 20 or 30 years ago, but not now.
All right back here in the very back. What's your question? This young lady would like to know how many spacecrafts you have been in.
I guess it's 4. 1 Apollo and 3 shuttles. Well, if you say spacecraft, it's 2 shuttles, because I only flew Challenger in Columbia. And so then if you add in Apollo-Soyuz, that makes it 3.
So we probably got time for about 2 more questions. All right, over there, yeah, young man. Sorry, could you repeat it? Ah, very good question. What milestone would you like humanity to achieve?
Say that one again.
Looking ahead, well, what do you think are some of the next milestones that humanity is going to achieve in space?
Oh, sky's the limit. We can't dream of everything yet. But we're making such great strides right now in so many areas. And so we can't even imagine what it's going to be. But I think going out into deep space more with people will be one of them. And the other thing is, I don't know if anybody's noticed, but we completely rely on satellites and other things we have in Earth orbit now. We have, it's just as if they took away the internet, we'd be in trouble. And if they took away Earth orbit vehicles and satellites and stuff, we'd be in trouble there too. So the real answer is I can't even imagine the things that are going to happen, because I get surprised about every 10 years when something comes up that I had never dreamt of, like 3D manufacturing. That's a good example. Who would have thunk it?
And looks like time for one more question from the back. Okay, and your question? She says, "Hi, I am deaf. Can a deaf adult be an astronaut?" She would like to know if a deaf adult could become an astronaut, someone who had hearing impairment.
Not yet. Maybe in 50 or 100 years, who knows? But right now, the requirements to become an astronaut, be it in commercial or military or civilian government like NASA, is the requirements are pretty high. But I think that'll change. Right now, we have mostly engineers and people like that, scientists that are in orbit doing their thing. But in time, we may have poets and people of various persuasions up in space. By the way, I mentioned my family, but I'd also like to have somebody stand up that I went to Longmont, that was in my class at Longmont High School. Class of 49, the 49ers, Dean Bowl, I think. And we have some farmland near Longmont, and so the people that are renting that farmland from us are Arnold and Pat Turner, so wherever they are. There we go. Well, it's a great future. All I can say to the young people here is, if you think you're interested in space, study hard, don't get into trouble, and if you set your heart on something, it gives you the best chance of making it. So I hope we'll have a lot of young people in the space program tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks for the honors, the flag ceremony at the beginning. That was great. Okay.
So the book signing will begin in a few moments. Once we are set up, it will be out in the atrium. Vance, if you want to come across this way.
Sure. Okay, you bet.
Thanks.